Hi, you're probably choosing to confuse yourself. This is Doug Dane, and this is your daily tip from my book, Mistaken Identity. I think too many people struggle in life because they've got a mistaken identity. Life is actually way simpler than we make it, but because we are mistaken about who we are, and we're mistaken about how to succeed, or mistaken about how we feel about ourselves, we're mistaken about a bunch of things. And if you don't feel confident to succeed in life or solve your problems, your mistaken identity is causing you problems. And my book explains your mistaken identity and why you make the mistakes that you do. So here's my daily tip for living better and make no mistake, you deserve better. So this idea of, are you choosing to confuse yourself? There's a chapter in my book, it's called Stop It. We really need to stop choosing to confuse ourselves. So let me explain how you get confused and what it does to you. So let's say you're dealing with a situation, a problem that you want to solve. Could be a situation in your business. Could be, you're worried about succeeding. Maybe you're facing a conflict. Maybe it's something in your relationship. Whatever it is, there's a situation that is taking your attention and your energy. And what happens is you make a few mistakes when you're dealing with your problems. And because you're making the mistakes, you're choosing to make these mistakes. You're choosing actually to confuse yourself. And what happens is you get confused, and then you get frustrated. And you get frustrated with yourself. Then you turn on yourself, and you're hard on yourself, and that's not good. And you stay stuck. So here's a few things that you might be doing. You probably are asking too many questions. You probably ask people for their opinions. You probably listen to YouTube videos. You probably go ask somebody for advice. You probably make up a lot of questions in your mind. One thing is that when you're dealing with a situation, we are taught to actually procrastinate, not be decisive. Very few people were taught to be decisive. They were taught to procrastinate. And procrastination gets you to do a bunch of things. You ask for people's opinions. You go, let me think about it. So you put off. You might think about it, and it creates more questions inside. And so again, this causes confusion. You listen to too many distractions. Listen, our world is filled with distractions. You're bombarded by it. You might even be aware of it. I mean, you might choose to confuse yourself because you pick up this thing and you scroll around on it, tapping apps, getting rid of those red notifications, all the updates and likes and different things. Try to keep up to date with, all the information that's, coming at you, all the notifications on your phone. So you got a lot of distractions. And trust me, the companies that produce those apps, the social media companies, all the apps, everybody's vying for your attention. Okay. And generally it's not to help you get where you want to go. It's to help them get where they want to go. So you got a lot of distractions. Plus, listen, if you live in a busy city, I'm in New York City right now. If you live in a busy city, or you live or work in a busy environment, or I don't know, you're at a busy store. I mean, there's a lot going on. There's thoughts, there's ideas, there's conversations, there's noise, there's all kinds of distractions going on. And whether you know it or not, that stuff's getting in. You might overhear a conversation. You might not even like the conversation, but it's getting in. One of the biggest mistakes you make is you listen to your mistaken identity. You are locked into a perception of yourself, your skills, your abilities, your judgment. You look at your past as a gauge as to how good you are, or how successful you can be, whatever. You listen to your mistaken identity. Your mistaken identity likes to chat. Your ego, your false self, likes to yap away and confuse you. And what confusion also does is it causes fear. And fear is the entry point for the enemy. And the enemy would be called the devil if you're thinking spiritually. Psychological circles, it would be the ego, the false self. And so fear is the entry point where we start having these dialogues with ourselves. And then because life seems harder, I mean, definitely, life is pretty hard these days. There's a lot going on in the world, and you're a witness to it, and you have access to it. It comes at you through your phones and through the news, etc. And so, because life appears harder, we think it's harder. There's a lot of not so good things going on in the world, but that doesn't mean that life is actually harder. Okay, nature operates precisely. Okay, regardless of what is going on outside. Now, you might not agree with that. It means you're not really aware of that, or you don't really understand that. But just trust me. Just because things are hard on the outside, it doesn't mean that things are actually hard, and that you have to start believing and thinking that it's hard. Because if you do that, of course, you're going to get confused. You're going to get overwhelmed, and then you're controlled by the narrative. All right, there's a narrative. There's always a narrative, right? Used to be called propaganda back during the war, World War I, World War II. They used propaganda. The enemy would use propaganda. Well, there's a lot of enemies out there that are using propaganda, not for you, for them. And so we got to be really careful about the narrative. There's a narrative in social media. There's a narrative on the news. I was laughing the other night watching the news. I actually sometimes watch the news now because I just want to see how badly they're confusing people and trying to control the narrative. So of course, we know now this summer there's been a lot of hot temperatures, and in the news business it's called a news hook. And so a news hook. So there's the original story, and then they try to hook up another story and hook up another story to keep the narrative going, to keep the story going. And so they were talking about the news the other night, and all this terrible weather, and there's hail and rainstorms, and it's like end of world stuff. It's the narrative. Now you might not agree or like what I have to say, but you're just sucked into a narrative. Trust me. You may not know that, but I know it. And so sometimes we're controlled by the narrative. There's narratives in your company. There's narratives in your relationship. There's narratives in the news. There's narratives on social media. There's narratives in your family, friendships. There's narratives everywhere. You got to keep control of your own narrative and not listen to all the other narratives. So what's the answer? Number one, take time each day to calm your mind. You might wake up like a lot of people wake up with a very noisy mind, anxious, worried, thinking, I got to get going. I got these things to do. I got to get going. That's not the way to start your day. If you're feeling that way, stop, rest, meditate, do whatever you can do to kind of calm your mind, because your mind doesn't operate very well. Calmness of mind is one of the beautiful jewels of wisdom. Number two, remind yourself of who you are and what you came here to do. So how do you do that? Well, you think about, what do you want to do with your life? How do you want to help the world or help other people? That'll remind you who you are and what you came here to do. There's a great quote my mentor, Bob Proctor, shared with me. Let me see if I can pull it up really quick here on my phone. I wrote it, or somebody actually wrote it down for me and handed it to me on a cocktail napkin. And I read it all the time to myself, remind myself. So here's what he said. You can see it on the cocktails, an Air Canada cocktail napkin. It says, you think of yourselves as humans searching for a spiritual awakening, when in fact, you are spiritual beings attempting to cope with a human awakening. Seeing yourselves from the perspective of the spirit within will help you to remember why you came here and what you came here to do. So stop seeing yourself as a human searching for a spiritual awakening. You're actual spiritual being, and you're coping with a human awakening. Man, there's a lot of people having to cope these days. Okay, guard your mind against distractions. Right, you got to practice guarding your mind against all these distractions with your phone, the news, other people. Talking to yourself from your mistaken identity, from your false self. So don't listen to your mistaken identity, and have your true self remind your false self that everything's going to be okay. Parent your false self, just like you would as an adult with a child. everything's going to be okay. Everything's going to be okay. Everything's going to be fine. Everything's going to be okay. Don't worry, because tomorrow you'll wake up and you'll still be here, and whatever you worried about probably didn't even happen. So don't confuse yourself. Don't choose to confuse yourself because you get frustrated with yourself. Then you turn on yourself, and then you're hard on yourself, and you don't like yourself, and that's not good. Thank you.